Hello? Hi, how are you?
Nothing.
Yeah,
Just getting together here.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, great. So, welcome to the meeting. This week, we had another Devo meeting. And yeah, so that was a pretty good meeting. We actually covered a paper there's a new paper on C. elegans. It was on the Nobel Prizes that were awarded to C. elegans over the years. So actually, C. elegans has been the focus of 4 Nobel Prizes over the years, ranging from the discovery of GFP to, things like microRNAs and other types of scientific discoveries, so both tools and scientific discoveries. And then the paper also talked about some of the databases that the community runs. So the community runs databases such as Wormbase and Worm Atlas and some other tools that are indispensable really to doing C. elegans experimental research. So that was a good paper. We went over that. Yeah, and that was our DevoWorm meeting. I'm about to publish the DevoWorm group summary for the year. I have to give a report every year to OpenWorm, and so I'm about to post that annual update. And it just covers some of the things we've talked about this year. So be on the lookout for that on the DevoWorm YouTube channel. Okay. The other thing happening, of course, this week was NeuroIPS, and I did not attend that, but I saw that there was a lot of interesting stuff going on there. Last week, I gave an overview of the NeuroIPS conference, went through the the schedule and everything, and we didn't get to go, but it looked like it was very interesting. And so this week I want to follow up with some things from their blog about their best papers of the conference and things like that. Hello, Vidhi, how are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm good.
All right, I'm good too.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, how was last week apart from all this?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Did you have any updates for us, or?
No, not updates actually. I've just been caught up with exams and they'll be going on for like 10 more days. So yeah. And I thought I could present something this week, but then I've just been so caught up with exams that I couldn't prepare anything. So probably later on.
Okay. Well, that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Now, this is a blog post from NeurIPS, and this is announcing the NeurIPS 2025 Best Paper Awards. So this is, again, kind of an overview of some of these things that I just mentioned. So let's read this article. The Best Paper Award Committee members were nominated by the program chairs and the database and benchmark track chairs, who selected leading researchers across machine learning topics. These nominations were approved by the general chairs and next generation and accessibility chairs. The Best Paper Award committees were tasked with selecting a handful of highly impactful papers from the main track and the datasets and benchmark track of the conference. With that, we are excited to share the news that the Best and Runner-Up Paper Awards this year go to 7 groundbreaking papers, including 4 best papers, one of which is from the datasets and benchmark track, and 3 runners-up. The 7 papers highlight advances in diffusion model theory, self-supervised reinforcement learning, attention mechanisms for large language models, reasoning capabilities in large language models, online learning theory, neural scaling laws, and benchmarking methodologies for language model diversity. So here are the winners. So the first one is artificial hive mind, the open-ended homogeneity of language models and beyond. And this is where we're talking about how all of the outputs of the current frontier models are converging. So the abstract reads, large language models often struggle to generate diverse, human-like creative content, raising concerns about the long-term homogenization of human thought through repeated exposure to similar outputs. Yet scalable methods for evaluating language model output diversity remains limited, especially beyond narrow tasks such as random number or name generation, or beyond repeated sampling from a single model. To address this gap, we introduce Infinity Chat, a large-scale data set of 26,000 diverse, real-world open-ended user queries that admit a wide range of plausible answers with no single ground truth. We introduced the first comprehensive taxonomy for characterizing the full spectrum of open-ended prompts posted to language models, comprising 6 top-level categories. And so the examples include creative content, generation, brainstorm, and ideation, that further breaks down to 17 subcategories. Using Infinity Chat, we present a large-scale study of mode collapse in language models, revealing a pronounced artificial hive mind effect in open-ended generation of language models, characterized by a few things. The first is intra-model repetition, where a single model consistently generates similar responses. And then more so, number 2, which is intermodal homogeneity, where different models produce strikingly similar outputs. Infinity Chat also includes 31,250 human annotations across absolute ratings and pairwise preferences, with 25 independent human annotations per example. This enables studying collective and individual-specific human preferences in response to open-ended queries. Our findings show that state-of-the-art language models, reward models, and language model judges are less well calibrated to human ratings on model generations that elicit differing idiosyncratic annotator preferences, despite maintaining comparable overall quality. So Infinity Chat presents the first large-scale resource for systematically studying real-world open-ended queries to language models, revealing critical insights to guide future research for mitigating long-term AI safety risks posed by the artificial hive mind. So this is just kind of reflections from the selection committee. So this paper made a substantial and timely contribution to the understanding of diversity, pluralism, and societal impact in modern language models. The authors introduced Infinity Chat, which is this model that we talked about. Beyond releasing a valuable data set, this paper provided deep analytical insights through the first comprehensive taxonomy of open-ended prompts and an extensive empirical study across more than 70 models, revealing the artificial hive mind effect, which is pronounced intra- and inter-model homogenization that raises serious concerns about long-term risks to human creativity, value plurality, and independent thinking. The findings expose critical miscalibration between current reward models, automated judges, and diverse human preferences, highlighting the tension between alignment and diversity and establishing the foundation for future work on preserving heterogeneity in AI systems. Overall, this work sets a new standard for datasets and benchmarks that advance scientific understanding and address pressing societal changes rather than solely improving technical performance. Okay, so that's the first one. The second paper is Gated Attention for Large Language Models, Nonlinearity, Sparsity, and Attention Sync-Free. So this is another paper where they're thinking about these post-transformer architectures, or at least improving the attention mechanism in transformers as they stand today. So the abstract reads, gating mechanisms have been widely utilized from early models like LSTMs and highway networks to recent state space models linear attention, and also softmax attention. Yet, existing literature rarely examines the specific effects of gating. In this work, we conduct comprehensive experiments to systematically investigate gating automated softmax attention variants. Specifically, we perform a comprehensive comparison over 30 variants of 15B mixture of expert models, 15 billion mixture of expert models, and 1.7 billion dense models trained on a 3.5 trillion token dataset. Our central finding is that a simple modification, applying a head-specific sigmoid gate after the scale dot product attention, or SDPA, consistently improves performance. This modification also enhances training stability, tolerates larger learning rates, and improves scaling properties. By comparing various gating positions and computational variants, we attribute this effectiveness to two key factors. So the first is introducing nonlinearity upon the low rank mapping in the softmax attention, and the second is applying query-dependent sparse gating scores to modulate the SDPA output. Notably, we find this sparse gating mechanism mitigates massive activation, attention sink, and enhances long context extrapolation performance. We also release related code, which are in these GitHub repositories here, and models which are on Hugging Face here to facilitate future research. Furthermore, the most effective SDPA output gating is used in the QN3 next models, and these are also hosted on Hugging Face. So this is where they're using this QN3 next model. They're introducing this gated attention mechanism, and it's available in open source. So the selection committee, what they had to say was that the main finding of this paper is that performance of large language models using the softmax attention can be consistently improved by introducing head-specific sigmoid gating after the scaled dot product, attention operation in both dense and mixture of experts transformer models. This finding is backed up by more than 30 experiments on different variants of gated softmax attention. This paper also includes careful analysis showing that the introduction of the author's recommended form of gating improves the training stability of large language models, reduces the attention sink phenomena that has been widely reported in attention models, and enhances the performance of context-linked extension. The main recommendation of this paper is easily implemented, and given the extensive evidence provided in the paper for this modification to large language model architecture, we expect this idea to be widely adopted. And so this paper represents a substantial amount of work that is possible only with access to industrial scale computing resources and the author's sharing of the results of their work, which will advance the community's understanding of attention in large language models. And so this is a breath of fresh air, apparently, from a lot of the models where the code is proprietary, not open source. So they make a point to talk about how they appreciate this being open sourced. The next paper is 1,000 layer networks for self-supervised reinforcement learning. Scaling depth can enable new goal-reaching capabilities. So this is now moving to reinforcement learning. So the abstract reads, scaling of self-supervised learning has driven breakthroughs in language and vision, yet comparable progress has remained elusive in reinforcement learning. In this paper, we study building blocks for self-supervised reinforcement learning that unlock substantial improvements in scalability, with network depth serving as a critical factor. Whereas most reinforcement learning papers in recent years have relied on shallow architectures of around 2 to 5 layers, we demonstrate that increasing the depth to up to 1,024 layers can significantly boost performance. Our experiments are conducted in an unsupervised goal condition setting where no demonstrations or rewards are provided, so an agent must explore from scratch and learn how to maximize the likelihood of reaching commanded goals. Evaluated on simulated locomotion and manipulation tasks, our approach increases performance on the self-supervised contrastive reinforcement learning algorithm by outperforming other goal condition baselines. Increasing the model depth not only increases success rates, but also qualitatively changes the behaviors learned. So this is reflections from the selection committee again. This paper challenges the conventional assumption that the information provided by reinforcement learning is insufficient to effectively guide the numerous parameters of deep neural networks, hence suggesting that large AI systems be predominantly trained through self-supervision, with reinforcement learning reserved solely for fine-tuning. The work introduces a novel and easy to implement reinforcement learning paradigm for the effective training of very deep neural networks, employing self-supervised and contrastive reinforcement learning. The accompanying analysis demonstrates that reinforcement learning can scale efficiently with increasing network depth, leading to the emergence of more sophisticated capabilities. In addition to presenting compelling results, the study includes several useful analyses, for example, for highlighting the important role of batch size scaling for deeper networks within contrastive reinforcement learning. So that is an example of contrastive reinforcement learning and how that is implemented. And then we go to diffusion models. So we're moving from large language models to reinforcement learning to diffusion models. So this one is why diffusion models don't memorize, the role of implicit dynamical regularization in training. And so this abstract reads, diffusion models have achieved remarkable success across a wide range of generative tasks. The key challenge is understanding the mechanisms that prevent the memorization of training data and allow generalization. In this work, we investigate the role of the training dynamics in the transition from generalization to memorization. Through extensive experiments and theoretical analysis, we identify two distinct timescales. The first is an early time at which models begin to generate high-quality samples, and the second is a later time beyond which memorization emerges. So we have these two different timescales that the model operates on. So it's this generative part that's early, and then this memorization at a later time. Crucially, we find that increases linearly with the training set size while remaining constant. This creates a growing window of training times where models generalize effectively, despite showing strong memorization if training continues beyond it. It is only when it becomes larger than a model-dependent threshold that overfitting disappears at infinite training times. These findings reveal that a form of implicit dynamical regularization in the training dynamics, which allows to avoid memorization even in highly overparameterized settings. Our results are supported by numerical experiments with standard UNet architectures on realistic and synthetic datasets, and by a theoretical analysis using a tractable random features model studied in high dimensional limit. So the selection committee said, this paper presents foundational work on the implicit regularization dynamics of diffusion models, delivering a powerful result by unifying empirical observation with formal theory. The critical finding is that quantitative identification of two distinct predictable timescales, an early dataset independent generalization phase, followed by a linear dataset size dependent memorization phase. So it's dataset independent versus dataset dependent. This demonstration of an expanding window for effective generalization is not merely an empirical finding, but is rigorously explained by deriving the spectral properties of the random features model using random matrix theory. By linking the practical success of diffusion models directly to a provable dynamical property, the implicit postponement of overfitting, this paper provides fundamental, actionable insight into the mechanisms governing modern generative AI, setting a new standard for analytical depth in the study of generalization. Okay, so those are the winners of this best paper award. Because it's a big conference, you have to have 4 of them. So there are a bunch of runners up as well. So the first one is, does reinforcement learning really incentivize reasoning capacity in large language models beyond the base model? And so they're doing this method called reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards, or RLVR. has recently demonstrated notable success in enhancing reasoning performance of large language models, particularly mathematics and programming tasks. It is widely believed that, similar to how traditional reinforcement learning helps agents to explore and learn new strategies, RLVR enables large language models to continuously self-improve, thus acquiring novel reasoning abilities that exceed the capacity of the corresponding base models. In this study, we take a critical look at the current state of RLVR by systematically probing the reasoning capability boundaries of RLVR-trained large language models across diverse model families, reinforcement learning algorithms, and math/coding/visual reasoning benchmarks, using at-large values as the evaluation metric. With RLVR improved sampling efficiency towards the correct path, we surprisingly find that the current training does not elicit fundamentally new reasoning patterns. We observe that while RLVR trained models outperform their base models at smaller values, base models achieve higher scores when it is large. Moreover, we observe that reasoning capability boundary of large language models often narrows as RLVR training progresses. Further coverage and perplexity analysis shows that the reasoning paths generated by RLVR models are already included in the base model sampling distribution, suggesting that their reasoning abilities originate from and are bounded by the base model. From this perspective, treating the base model as an upper bound, our quantitative analysis shows that 6 popular RLVR algorithms perform similarly and remain far from optimal and fully leveraging the potential of the base model. In contrast, we find that distillation can introduce new reasoning patterns from the teacher and genuinely expand the model's reasoning capabilities. Taken together, our findings suggest that the current RLVR methods do not fully realize the potential of reinforcement learning to elicit genuinely novel reasoning abilities in large language models. This underscores the need for improved reinforcement learning paradigms, such as continual scaling and multi-turn agent environment interaction to unlock this potential. So RLVR sounds like an interesting area, and they're kind of tying in other types of agentive learning into this. So the selection committee says this paper delivers a masterfully executed and critically important negative finding on a widely accepted foundational assumption in large language model research, that reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards elicits genuinely new reasoning capabilities. The paper shows that RLVR training across various model families, tasks, and algorithms enhances sampling efficiency without expanding reasoning capacity already present in base models. Reinforcement learning narrows exploration, rewarded trajectories are amplified, but the broader solution space shrinks, revealing that RLVR optimizes within rather than beyond the base distribution. This is an important finding which will hopefully incentivize fundamentally new reinforcement learning paradigms, able to navigate the vast action space and genuinely expand large language model reasoning capabilities. So that's interesting that they kind of have they work out these sort of dynamics for reinforcement learning with application of large language models. Okay. This next one is optimal mistake bounds for transductive online learning. So this abstract says, we resolve a 30-year-old open problem concerning the power of unlabeled data in online learning by tightly quantifying the gap between transductive and standard online learning. We prove that for every concept class with little stone dimension, the transductive mistake bound is at least, and they don't have there are some formatting problems with this blog post. This establishes an exponential improvement over previous lower bounds of, and respectively due to this citation here and this other citation. So the first is Ben David, Kushelowitz and Mansour, 1995-1997, and Henneke, Moran, and Schaefer, 2023. We also show that our bound is tight. For every, it's supposed to be a symbol there, there exists a class of little stone dimension with transductive mistake bound. Our upper bound also improves the previous best-known upper bound from Ben David. These results demonstrate a quadratic gap between the transductive and standard online learning, thereby highlighting the benefit of advanced access to the unlabeled instance sequence. This stands in stark contrast to the pack setting, where transductive and standard learning exhibit simple sample complexities. So this is so the selection committee says this paper presents a breakthrough in learning theory, deserving the NeuroIPS Best Paper Runner-Up Award for its elegant, comprehensive, and definitive resolution of a 30-year-old open problem. The authors not only precisely quantified the optimal mistake bound for transductive online learning, but they've also achieved a tight match with an upper bound. This establishes a quadratic gap between transductive and standard online learning, a result that represents an exponential leap beyond all previous logarithmic lower bounds, and dramatically highlights the theoretical value of unlabeled data in this setting, a crucial insight distinct from its more limited role in PAC learning. So what does this mean? I'm not really sure. This is largely a proof, so it's an open problem in the field. I'm not really familiar with this problem. This is really just thinking about how you can do online learning without labels, and it's just an example of how this is kind of worked out mathematically. So some of the insights here. For the lower bound, the adversary employs a sophisticated strategy that balances forcing mistakes with carefully managing the shrinking of the version space, leveraging the concept of paths and trees as a fundamental underlying structure. The upper bound, demonstrating the learnability within these mistakes, introduces an innovative hypothesis class construction that embeds a sparse coding for off-path nodes, a probabilistic design where most off-path labels are zero, but the rare ones carry immense information. The learner's strategy to exploit this class is equally brilliant, integrating several non-standard sophisticated techniques, for example, danger zone minimization to control the instance sequence presented by the adversary, splitting experts via multiplicative weights approach to handle uncertainty about a node's on-path status, and a strategic transition to halving when sufficient information is gathered from the sparsely encoded off-path labels. This intricate interplay between a cleverly constructed hypothesis class and a highly adaptive learning algorithm showcases a masterclass in theoretical analysis and design. So that's a good paper there. This next paper, Superposition Yields Robust Neural Scaling. This is the success of today's large language models depends on the observation that larger models perform better. However, the origin of this neural scaling law, that loss decreases as a power law with model size, remains unclear. We propose that representation superposition, meaning that large language models represent more features than they have dimensions, can be a key contributor to loss and cause neural scaling. Based on Anthropic's toy model, we used weight decay to control the degree of superposition, allowing us to systematically study how loss scales with model size. When superposition is weak, the loss follows a power law only if data feature frequencies are power law distributed. In contrast, under strong superposition, the loss generically scales inversely with model dimension across a broad class of frequency distributions due to geometric overlaps between representation vectors. We confirm that open source large language models operate in the strong superposition regime and have loss scaling inversely with model dimension, and that chinchilla scaling laws are also consistent with this behavior. Our results identify representation superposition as a central driver of neural scaling laws, providing insights into questions like when neural scaling laws can be improved and when they will break down. And so the selection committee says this paper moves beyond observations of neural scaling laws. The empirically established phenomena in which model loss exhibits a power law decrease as model size, dataset size, or computational resources are increased. to demonstrate that representation superposition constitutes the primary mechanism governing these laws. Authors introduce a controlled toy model to examine how superposition and data structure affect the scaling of loss with model size and demonstrate that under strong superposition, where features are overlapping, the loss scales consistently as an inverse power law with respect to the model dimension. The core findings are supported by a series of carefully designed experiments and offer fresh insights into an important research area. So these are their papers that they've given awards to for this year, and that is all we have there. Okay, the other thing that we should probably go over is the 2025 Sejnowski-Hinton Prize. So the NeuroIPS Organizing Committee is pleased to announce the winner of the 2025 Sejnowski-Hinton Prize, and this is Tim Lillicrap, Daniel Condon, Douglas Tweed, and Colin Ackerman for their groundbreaking 2016 paper, Random Synaptic Feedback Weights Support Error Backpropagation for Deep Learning. This was published in Nature Communications as is also available on the archive. So this is, I guess, a paper, like the best paper of all time that they kind of pick and kind of bring it back into relevance today. So this is, the topic of this paper is feedback alignment. And we'll talk about that paper later, but I wanted to kind of go over this blog post and see what they have to say about it. So theories of the brain have long sought to explain how neural circuits learn efficiently using only local information. And so this is, an example. This is how synapses adjust based on signals available at each connection, rather than through some explicit global error propagation. So you're correcting things locally, you're processing information locally, and this happens at every synapse. You can assume some sort of global error propagation, but that's not really the way the network works. Inspired by this challenge, researchers have explored ways to train artificial neural networks that perform gradient descent using local learning rules. This paper is recognized for its contribution to that pursuit through the discovery of feedback alignment. The authors demonstrated that multi-layer networks can learn effectively when fixed, using fixed random feedback weights, rather than requiring exact backwards weight symmetry as in backpropagation. So you have these sort of random feedback weights that come from the local interactions of the synapses. Remarkably, the network's forwarded weights naturally align with these random feedback signals over the course of learning, yielding a biased yet useful estimate of the loss gradient. This insight provided the first concrete biologically grounded solution to the long-standing weight transport problem, the question of how real neurons follow loss gradients without non-local information transfer. And so this work had significant impact, helping to establish a new subfield of biologically plausible learning rules in the NeuroIPS community and beyond. So basically, the Sejnowski-Hinton Prize is awarded annually to a paper published within the past 10 years that has made major contributions to computational theories of the brain, especially drawing insights from artificial intelligence, and has had a significant impact on the NeuroIPS community. All right, any questions about that?
That was a lot of material.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of this stuff is not like easily accessible. If you're in that subfield, then you understand exactly what's going on. But
it is interesting just to return to the kind of beginning topic of hive mind, and just wondering how much that is driven by. I'm trying to think of the researcher who covered, I think it was at Santa Fe Institute, but covered the different data sources of each model.
okay.
I mean, as like best you could determine.
Yeah.
Like how much does that drive it versus the it's just everybody using the same benchmarks, you know.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely what do they call that particular problem where everybody's just trying to inch up the same benchmarks?
I'm
Okay,
not
take care.
sure. Yeah, take care. Yeah, I'm not sure what it would be.
Right, but yeah, there's you know there's
Yeah, I mean that's obviously a problem if you want generalization.
today is the big foundation models and brain and behavior.
Okay.
So this is the day where there'll be more like a lot of the presentations that are of interest are today. I mean, I should say for kind of like neuro, like EEG electrophys models.
Yeah.
Will be talked about today. So, luckily, one of the organizers is a member of the tower. So, plus these are going to be recorded. So these will all be. What's that?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, but I don't think live streamed.
No.
So, or I'll check, but you know, it won't be until like 9 something.
Oh, okay.
On West Coast time.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's great. So, thinking about this feedback alignment problem. So this is a Nature Communications paper they mentioned in the award call. This is from 2016. This is Nature Communications. The title of this paper: Random Synaptic Feedback Weights Support Error Backpropagation for Deep Learning. So this is where they think about deep architectures and thinking about what's going on in the brain, and then thinking about what's going on in models. So the brain processes information through multiple layers of neurons. This deep architecture is represented powerfully, but complicates learning because it is difficult to identify the responsible neurons when a mistake is made. So this is this credit assignment problem that they're interested in. So, you have basically a network where there are these generic signals that are being sent, and you'd like to be able to isolate and identify where things are coming from. And, in case you have errors or mistakes, you can correct them or figure out where the errors are coming from. In machine learning, the backpropagation algorithm assigns blame by multiplying error signals with all the synaptic weights on each neuron's axon and further downstream. So this is where they use they talk about how backpropagation in machine learning can basically sort of amplifies the error signal. And so, however, this involves a precise symmetric backward connectivity pattern, which is thought to be impossible in the brain. So you have this amplification of the error. So you can identify it in some way, but this, of course, requires a specific architecture to be in place. This precise symmetric backward connectivity pattern that the brain doesn't have, because the brain has this structure which is often asymmetrical, or at least not symmetric in its structure, and it doesn't have this sort of forward this forward and backward ability where you can trace things back. Here we demonstrate that the strong architectural constraint is not required for effective error propagation. We present a surprisingly simple mechanism that assigns blame by multiplying errors by even random synaptic weights. This mechanism can transmit teaching signals across multiple layers of neurons. It performs as effectively as backpropagation on a variety of tasks. Our results help reopen questions about how the brain could use error signals and dispel long-held assumptions about algorithmic constraints on learning. So it's an interesting paper, very influential. Going into the article, networks in the brain compute via multiple layers of interconnected neurons. During learning, these neurons are believed to adjust their synapses so that network's outputs become more appropriate for its tasks. In many cases, learning is thought to utilize error signals, such as those that result from mismatches between expected and actual perceptions, or between intended and realized motor behaviors. This requires mechanisms that can adjust the weight of synapses earlier in a network. So if you take synapse between X sub I and H sub J, and they show this in figure 1 on the basis of downstream errors. And it's shown, so this example is figure 1A, XI and HJ, and then this other example, E, is also shown in figure 1, so for the error. Naive learning rules could adjust synapses deep within a network based on the correlations between a scalar error signal and the neuronal activity. However, the performance of such learning rules slows significantly as the size of a network grows. So as the network gets bigger, the performance of these naive learning rules decreases. And so this is just, obviously because the number of neurons in network, as they increase, the variance and estimates of a neuron's contribution to the error also increase. So the more neurons you have, the more likely it is that the error could be from a larger number of neurons, and thus lowering the probability of finding any one path. More powerful learning rules could send specific teaching signals to a neuron based on how that neuron contributed to the error. In artificial intelligence, an algorithm called backpropagation of error, or backprop, is used to assign error on a neuron-by-neuron basis. Backprop works well in real-world applications, underlies recent advances in reinforcement and unsupervised learning, and it can account for cell responses in some areas of cortex. But for a variety of reasons, it has been difficult to imagine how a learning algorithm, such as backprop, could be implemented by neural circuits in the brain. And so one of the most significant issues is that backprop requires that downstream errors are fed back to upstream neurons by an exact symmetric copy of the downstream synaptic weight matrix. So this requires sort of this symmetric connectivity. You can't have a lot of structure in the network. You can't have a lot of asymmetric structure specifically. More precisely, backprop multiplies error signals E by weight matrix WT, which is the transpose of the forward synaptic set of synaptic connections W. This issue was described in detail by Grossberg, who named it the weight transport problem. The name arises from the fact that for each neuron, information about downstream synaptic weights must be transported to make optimal updates to the neuron's incoming or forward synaptic weights. Backprop requires each neuron hidden deep within the network to have precise knowledge of all its downstream synapses, since the error signal arriving at a hidden unit must be multiplied by the strength of that neuron's forward synaptic connections to the source of the error. Weight transport was also identified as a major problem by Zipser and Rummelhart, and their concerns were echoed by Crick, who noted that, when taken at face value, backprop seems to require rapid information transfer back along axons from each of its synaptic outputs. So this is figure 1, and the caption here is random feedback weights can deliver useful teaching signals. So what we're looking for are teaching signals that assign the location of the error and train the network to avoid making that error again. And that's what we're doing here. So in A, we have an example. We have X, H, and Y. Those are the 3 layers. We have X of I, which is this neuron here in the middle. That's part of the input. It goes to H sub J, which is in the J layer, and that is a feed forward connection. And then H sub J then feeds to each of the 3 Y neurons equally. And then there's this feedback mechanism where you take the outputs of each y, and they feed back to J sub or H sub j using this error term here, and that gives us this signal that says, okay, you've made an error or you've made a correct choice, and this is, so there's a feedback mechanism, but the idea is to correct the error that's been made. And then, of course, B, we have these layers. So we have WO, which is the input to the hidden layer, and then W, which maps the hidden layer to the output layer, and then the transpose of WWT, which maps the output layer back to the hidden layer. And so you can see that that's basically how they treat this as a transposition problem. And then C shows WO, which is going from the input layer to the hidden layer, and then we have W, which is the hidden layer to the output layer, and B, which is sort of the feedback. And then we have this model of actual biological synapses on axons. So we see HJ, which is this hypothetical neuron with axons, and the axons have synapses over here. These synapses here are imagined as this matrix WO, which is these ith-jth connections. So you have all these different connections here going into HJ, and then you have this error here, which is this neuron here, B, and so you have this synaptic connection here between HJ and B, and that's what you see here, which is this feedback mechanism. So basically, the idea is to trace back the error to a specific source, use that error to learn not to make that error again, and then improves the performance of the network. Okay, so then a number of studies have suggested potential solutions to the weight transport problem. Indeed, encouraged by initial empirical observations, several theoretical studies examined the possibility that backprop might in fact be implemented via the retrograde transmission of information along axons, and that's shown here in D. However, further empirical work has shown that retrograde transport operates on timescales that are orders of magnitude slower than forward propagating neural activity, making it fundamentally unable to support backprop-like learning. As an alternative to sending error information anadromically, it has been suggested that errors could instead be fed back through a second network. However, most of these approaches either assume that forward and feedback connections are symmetric, or that they propose more intricate learning rules for the backwards weights that maintain precise symmetry. These approaches to the weight transport problem have helped to perpetuate the view that to achieve backprop-like learning performance, the brain would have to exhibit precise symmetric information, and does so despite achieving only a modest symmetry and a reciprocal connectivity. Of course, these observations are compatible with the possibility that the brain makes use of more intricate architectures or more complex algorithms. Our results also leave open many open questions about how the brain might implement fast, error-driven learning. Importantly, however, they reveal much lower architectural constraints on what is required for effective error propagation across multiple layers of neurons. So that is the basis of their paper. Then they give these results, which are that random feedback weights can deliver useful teaching signals. So they have this matrix of random feedback weights, and they can use that as a tutoring mechanism. And then they call this feedback alignment, and this matches backprop in terms of its performance. So you have backprop in this black function here, and feedback alignment in the green function, and they're pretty much very similar. Feedback alignment learns under a variety of conditions. So this means that it generalizes well, and that these signals can serve to correct the network under a variety of conditions. And so this is an example here of how feedback alignment works in multi-layer networks comprised of nonlinear neurons. Again, comparing backprop and then mapping this out in a network. A 3-layer network and a 4-layer network. So we saw the 3-layer network in figure 1 and figure 3. We see the 4-layer network. Then Figure 4, feedback alignment operates in larger networks with more complex dynamics. So using the MNIST dataset as input, we have the signal of the hidden units, we have then the signal of the output units, and we get these patterns here. And so it's able to, feedback alignment is able to deal with this network and its input. And so the discussion, the most effective forms of learning in large networks of neurons rely on mechanisms that adjust synaptic weights according to errors that are detected further downstream. In re-examining the conditions under which neural networks can exhibit such forms of deep learning, we have identified a new algorithm that we call feedback alignment. We show that in its simplest form, feedback alignment is able to make use of a fixed random connectivity pattern to update synaptic weights throughout a network. To our surprise, even with such minimal constraints on connectivity patterns, feedback alignment can achieve learning performances that are comparable to the backpropagation of error algorithm. Critically, this demonstrates that the kind of precise synaptic connectivity between layers of neurons that is required by backprop is not essential to achieve effective transmission of error across layers. In characterizing the performance of feedback alignment, we first demonstrated that the algorithm is effective in using error signals to update synaptic weights in simple linear and nonlinear networks. We then showed that feedback alignment is also effective in larger networks that incorporate multiple hidden layers, and in networks that exhibit sparse connectivity or impose more realistic constraints on how activity is represented. Finally, our investigations into how feedback alignment works suggest that the algorithm's power relies on the fact that the weight matrices of the forward-going synapses evolve to align approximately with those in the feedback pathway. Taken together, our study reveals much lower architectural constraints on what is required for error propagation across layers of neurons, and this provides insights into how neural networks might support fast learning in large deep networks. Feedback alignment offers a surprising and simple solution to the problem of synaptic weight transport. As with many forms of learning that have been proposed to occur in the brain, it makes use of the idea that teaching signals could be carried by reciprocal connections, and there are a whole host of references on that. However, in the case of feedback alignment, we have shown that this does not depend on detailed symmetric reciprocal connectivity, and yet it is still able to train large networks quickly. There are, of course, many outstanding questions regarding how the brain could utilize learning processes that rely on error propagation to address upstream synaptic connections in a network. This includes how exactly the brain computes and represents errors, and how the feed-forward and feedback pathways might interact with one another. So we need to figure this out to sort of understand supervised learning, and it's not unique to any one algorithm. This is a problem that is sort of an artifact of taking sort of a brain-inspired model and abstracting it down to the type of system we have in layered deep networks, where we have connections, we have weight matrices, but we don't have the rest of the mechanisms in the brain that, biologically this is handled with ease. So this is kind of going through how this relates to supervised learning. So a keen insight that has been that rather than requiring an external teacher, errors can result from mismatches between expected and actual perceptions, or between intended and realized motor consequences. So this is, of course, an insight, of course, that you see in active inference as well, whereas there's this mismatch between a prior distribution or a prior experience and a current experience, and that contributes to a posterior distribution that's constantly updated. So this is very similar in that way to active inference. And of course, this is in contrast to having this tutor or having this supervisor or supervised learning mechanism. So for example, it is possible to derive teaching signals from sensory input by trying to predict one modality from another, by trying to predict the next term in a temporal sequence, or by trying to encode and reconstruct sensory information. These processes can be thought of as supervised tasks, with the sensory activity itself playing the role of the teacher. Indeed, experimental data from a range of systems has shown that neuronal populations represent prediction, mismatch, and motor errors in their activity. So this is, again, common in motor control and in some other areas of neuroscience where you're looking for the mismatch. And of course, in cybernetics too, where we deal with these kind of systems that have good regulation. And so it's not so much about supervision, it's about learning from the error, learning from the mismatch, and then continuing to do that over time. So as with other forms of hierarchical learning, an important question is how feed-forward and feedback pathways interact with one another in the brain. It is well established that there are extensive feedback pathways that carry information from higher areas to lower sensory areas, and these connections have been shown to modulate the tuning properties and therefore the activity of neurons in lower areas. It therefore seems likely or perhaps inevitable that this top-down modulation of neuronal activity will impact the learning that goes on in the lower areas neuron synapses. Indeed, recent work has demonstrated that learning sensory motor tasks alters representations in early cortical areas. For higher layers to deliver error information that could enable lower layers to make useful changes to their synaptic weights, neurons in the lower layers should, at least in part, be able to differentiate a top-down error signal from activity originating in a forward pathway. Thus, a prediction is that one of the functions of backward pathways is to ultimately modulate plasticity processes at the synapses of a neuron in the forward pathway. In this regard, it is interesting that experimental evidence has shown that various third factors can modulate the magnitude and sign of synaptic plasticity mechanisms. And again, this is an artifact of the representation, the high level of abstraction from the brain we use in deep learning networks or in layered neural networks. That of, you only have the weight of the connection. You don't have multiple synapses that are, kind of maybe average those out or kind of figure out what the mean value is. We don't really model those in any meaningful way. And so this is, of course, going to remove some of the sort of the mechanisms that we may not know about that occur in the brain. So these third factors, of course, result in part from some of the neurophysiology. They could also be other types of things that result from emergence in the brain. Depolarizing inputs arriving at specific times or subcellular compartments, neuromodulators, different types of synapse can all regulate plasticity, resulting from the pairing of pre- and post-synaptic activity. So one example of this is that Hebbian learning protocols that result in long-term potentiation at neocortical synapses can be altered to result in long-term depression if they occur simultaneously with local subthreshold depolarizing inputs into the postsynaptic dendrite. And of course, then there's this other finding where an empirically grounded learning mechanism has been proposed in which forward and teaching signals are delivered concurrently into dendritic and somatic compartments, respectively. So there are a lot of ways to model this. And of course, we're not really interested in this paper in terms of brain modeling or neural modeling. We're interested in optimizing the performance of neural networks. So of course, there is this difference in the two. These observations suggest that there are a variety of plasticity mechanisms that would enable feed-forward and feedback pathways to interact during learning. Indeed, any task-driven learning will require mechanisms that serve to modulate ongoing plasticity. So, for example, reinforcement learning requires the delivery of a global signal that can be thought of as a widespread third factor for regulating ongoing synaptic plasticity. So this is interesting. They kind of bring up the global signal that results from reinforcement learning. At the other end of the spectrum, a learning algorithm such as Backprop would require a much more highly orchestrated computation and delivery of third factors to individual neurons in the hidden layer. By contrast, feedback alignment, representing a surprising middle ground, and that it has many of the performance advantages of backprop, but it markedly reduces the complexity of the machinery for computing and delivering third factors, which are these modulatory signals and feedback alignment that can be delivered via random connections by one or many neurons in the backward pathway to one of or many neurons in the hidden layer, and the modulatory signals themselves are computed on the basis of random connections in the backward pathway. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we're using stochasticity to sort of augment the system and correct errors. And this sort of represents a middle ground between backprop and then, trying to build in all of these complex mechanisms and third factors. So even something like reinforcement learning would be hard to sort of add into the network, but having sort of a neural modeling paradigm will also slow down our computations quite a bit. So using, stochasticity to sort of paper over that, or at least serve as a way to simulate that is kind of what they're suggesting, which is interesting because if you, you kind of think about it, you can do a lot of things with randomness, and this is true in biology, but also true in simulation. So it's an interesting point. Can you reduce all these mechanisms to sort of a random matrix? I guess it works here. And so, yeah, this just kind of goes through some more insights. And I think that's enough for that paper. So, so that was the award winner for this year, the Sejnowski-Hinton Prize. Any comments or questions on that?
A well-named, deserved prize.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think where I just saw his name recently, but anyway.
Good. Looks like Jesse's here. I don't know if Jesse had an update or wanted to.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. I can say more in maybe like, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, but I just got in and I appreciate the papers. But I have a few things to say, yes, in a couple minutes.
All right. We'll wait for that. All right. Why don't we go over this paper really quickly? This is more of a philosophical paper on something called variational propensities. This is, I don't know, I've been waiting to kind of talk about this paper because I'm not really sure where it fits into what we're talking about, especially today. But I did want to go through and kind of see what it was about and, maybe think about it in terms of not so much today, but like some of the things we've talked about in the last year. So this is from Attendees, which is a philosophical journal. This is called Variational Propensities, Development and Ultimate Causes. This is by Cristina Villegas. And so this is, we talk about variational models in active inference, variational Bayes, and other types of things. And so this is kind of relevant to that. But it's a philosophy paper, so it's maybe going to have a lot of like field-specific arguments that maybe we're not familiar with. So the abstract reads, this paper applies philosophical tools from the causalist/statisticalist debate to the Evo-devo idea of variational tendencies as propensities biasing phenotypic change. It contends that variational properties are present in a statistical sense in some populations' dynamics models, particularly quantitative genetic ones, providing ultimate variational explanations. It further argues that these properties, contrary to some recent views, cannot be subsumed under natural selection. Finally, it advocates for a causalist interpretation of these explanations, where variational statistical properties indirectly refer to Evo-devo's variational propensities. So this has a lot to do with sort of evolution of development and the philosophy of biology. And, from the abstract, it's a little hard to unpack, but they unpack it in the introduction here. So in the last 20 years, a considerable amount of work in the philosophy of biology has been devoted to the so-called causalist-statisticalist debate, which discusses whether evolutionary theory explanations, as exemplified in the mathematical apparatus of population dynamics models, refers to the causes of evolution or something else. So this is reviewed in this article here. Natural selection and its relation to fitness and drift is the main point of divergence for contendants. So the whole argument is based on this view of, what population dynamic, what are the important features of population dynamics models? Are we dealing with natural selection and its relation to fitness and drift? How are we thinking about that? Causalists defend that natural selection is a cause of evolutionary changes, whereas statisticalists argue that it is an explanatory statistical aggregate of causes acting at a different level. The bottom line is that there is some causal story that relates to these population level explanations, and that philosophers disagree about whether the explanations represent the story, which is embodied in causalism, or abstract away from it, which is the story of statisticalism, in order to predict how the next chapter goes. It is not coincidental that population dynamics models have captured so much attention from philosophers. These models are at the core of the modern synthesis view of evolution, constituting the main tool for explaining and predicting microevolutionary changes on the basis of fitness differences between traits in a population. So when they say the population dynamics models, they mean population genetics. And the kind of population genetics models you might find where, we have Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and we look at things like selection and drift, and those terms, or it's a population level phenomena. And so we're looking at a population of organisms as they're evolving. We're looking at their frequencies of alleles and how those change with natural selection or sometimes with drift. And, this is kind of the basis for the modern synthesis of evolution. So this is kind of the debate that they're having. So it's down in the weeds, but I wanted to give a little bit larger context here. Determining whether these models can accurately capture the causal components of this evolutionary process, and especially the role of natural selection within it, is a vital aspect of how evolutionary biology has achieved its ability to provide explanations and predictions. Despite this prominent position, however, the debate has barely been applied outside its own limits. The causal or non-causal nature of selection and drift in population dynamics models is usually taken as an isolated philosophical discussion over what types of explanation evolutionary theory can provide. But contemporary evolutionary biology is a multidisciplinary area where population dynamics models are only part of the story. The historically received idea is that these models play a privileged role in the explanation of evolution. It is nowadays questioned by conceptual approaches coming from very diverse domains within evolutionary biology. So you have paleontology, epigenetics, ecology, or Evo-devo, and then they kind of talk about the extended evolutionary synthesis, which is, of course, a number of different perspectives that are kind of put together in this extended evolutionary synthesis, which purports to explain things beyond the level of population genetics models. And these kinds of models in the extended evolutionary synthesis discuss the scope of classical approaches to evolution, particularly as exemplified by populations dynamics models in light of these other research agendas. So from a philosophical perspective, many of the puzzles posed by the EES debate eventually lead to scrutinizing what constitutes a cause of evolution, how to classify evolutionary causes into distinct types, and how these different types relate to one another. So one part of this is this discussion about reciprocal causation and the ultimate proximate distinction in biology. So reciprocal causation is where one thing causes another, and that other thing feeds back to the original thing. And there's this reciprocal nature of causation that's hard to disentangle. There's also this issue of ultimate proximate distinctions. So what is the ultimate cause and what is the proximate cause? And oftentimes those things are not the same thing. And so, these are things that people have struggled with throughout the history of biology, the philosophy of biology, and so forth. Ernst Marr famously divided the realm of biological causes into those pertaining to the lifespan of organisms, which he labeled proximate causes, and those acting at the level of populations and changing their composition through evolution, which he labeled ultimate causes. So this is from Marr in 1961. Accordingly, evolutionary biology was associated with the study of ultimate causes, while organismal causal processes were considered mostly irrelevant for evolutionary explanations. So this is where we have things that happen in organisms, and those things are we have, say, plasticity in organisms, and those result in changes in the organism. But then it's a separate question as to whether that contributes to heritability and the inheritance of those sorts of changes in plasticity or other things that are going on within the organism. So, there's this difference between the sort of proximate causality, what might impact plasticity within an organism, versus this ultimate causation, what impacts plasticity within a lineage. And so those are two separate questions, two separate causes. Accordingly, evolutionary biology is associated with the study of ultimate causes, while organismal causal processes were considered mostly irrelevant for evolutionary explanations. However, some non-classical evolutionary areas emphasize the impact of organismal level processes in determining evolutionary phenomena, in turn challenging the meaningfulness of such a separation between organismal and evolutionary causes. Interestingly, despite a lack of overlap in the discussions, this is precisely what is at stake in the causalist statisticalist debate with respect to selection, fitness, and drift. Those denying a causal nature to selection and population dynamics explanations do it on the basis of an alleged failure to relate the real ecological causes determining differential survival and reproduction. In other words, statisticalists believe that evolutionary changes are not caused by selection and drift, as in population dynamics models, but by the ecological and developmental organismal processes underlying them. Put in terms that are more familiar to the EES debate, statisticalism considers that evolution only has proximate causes, even if one can build good ultimate non-causal explanations of the evolutionary process through population dynamics models. Causalists, on the other hand, believe that evolutionary causation can also be depicted at the population level, and therefore that notions such as selection and drift represent genuine ultimate causes, be they autonomous or grounded on individual level causes. So these are distinctions that are made in the philosophical literature, and it's kind of one of these deep in the weeds arguments. It's hard to sort of disentangle, but basically, it's not really easy to sort of say what the right answer is, but it is definitely this sort of debate that can inform other things. So she gets into evolutionary developmental biology and kind of thinking about how that field sort of brings together these two forms of causation, the proximate and the ultimate. So you see in development, you see proximal causality, you see causality within the developmental process, how it unfolds, how it's buffered, how it exhibits this sort of generative capacity. And then you see evolution, which is this ultimate causation, which does things to influence development and so forth. So there's this nice interaction in evolutionary developmental biology that we don't see in other areas, and it can maybe bridge the gap of this argument or this debate. And so, in a nutshell, the received picture of evolution assumes that genotypic variation is random and left aside the emergence of phenotypic variance, focusing on how natural selection and drift shape the relative frequency of extant ones, and assuming that mutational impacts have negligible or at least undirected effects on this process. How such a frequency-based view of evolution can account for the emergence of phenotypic changes is known as the problem of variation. So what they're talking about here is that in your population genetics models, oftentimes what we're looking at is the frequency of variance or the frequency of alleles. And that doesn't really explain what's going on with the generation of phenotypic variants, which are often the products of many alleles. And the frequency of those variants don't necessarily map to the frequency of alleles. And so we need to have this, this is a problem of variation where how do you interpret all this variation in the model? And then we're dealing with two different levels of causality on top of that. One main contribution of Evo-devo to evolutionary biology is the study of developmental biases and phenotypic variation, explaining the origin and nature of phenotypic changes, in turn contributing to solving such a problem. While recent works have indeed explored the connections between selection as an ultimate cause and its proximate lower-level determinants, the problem of developmental biases and phenotypic variation remains unexplored from this perspective. So developmental biases are these changes in phenotype over development and how the same set of alleles can result in different phenotypes based on developmental processes. So in this paper, I fill in part of this gap by applying some aspects of the causalist statisticalist debate to the EES discussion on developmental biases and phenotypic variation. I first review the main aspects of the statisticalist debate and situate the problem of developmental biases with respect to it. Then I show that ultimate explanations make reference to developmental biases for the quantitative genetics idea of a phenotypic response to selection. Finally, I discuss the implications of this for a causal understanding of evolutionary models and argue that it makes sense to speak of developmental ultimate causes, a distinctive contribution of quantitative genetics and Evo-devo to the conceptual foundations of evolution that have not been acknowledged so far. So that's really interesting that, in this model, ultimately where she's going with this is to talk about developmental ultimate causes and to frame this sort of proximate ultimate causal framework in terms of Evo-devo. And then thinking about the statisticalist versus causalist debate, thinking about sort of the standard population dynamics model maybe is not simply a statistical construct, but as a causal construct. And of course, we know the difference between sort of statistical models and causal models is that statistical models, especially ones that are models of correlation, aren't necessarily causal. They don't necessarily tell you the cause of something. They just simply tell you what the structure of something is. Causal models are quite something else, and they usually involve some set of interventions or something like that. So this is kind of talking about this debate, and so this is kind of Elliot Sober basically took natural selection, migration, mutations, and genetic drift as forces of evolution acting on populations, and defined these as source laws of evolutionary change. And so you see source laws all the time in theoretical ecology, which explains the ecological interactions giving rise to natural selection and drift, which you can also have the laws of genetic transmission, explaining the occurrence and inheritance of mutations. In this picture, the models of population dynamics are consequence laws, or those that describe the system when forces are applied to it, predicting the dynamics of populations once ecological and heritable factors are considered. Although it is not the main current causalist position, the forces analogy first made explicit the idea that population dynamics models represent the causes of evolution. This is what the causalist statisticalist debate has considered for more than 20 years now. How much of actual causes of evolutionary change, or source laws in Soper's terms, are in the theoretical framework sustaining evolutionary predictive models, Soper's consequence laws. From the point of view of the extended evolutionary synthesis debate, the dispute concerns whether there are ultimate causes that population models refer to. So this is kind of the argument, and then she talks a lot about sort of these causalist arguments in the framework of population dynamics and how they can sort of maybe improve our model of population dynamics. And so going through, and so there are a lot of threads in this paper, and if you're not familiar with the area, I'm sure it's hard to follow, but there is a lot of stuff here. It's really interesting, especially if you follow these debates where you're looking at sort of the sources and causes of evolution. One point here, she starts talking about genotype to phenotype maps, and this is an important tool for looking at the relationship between genes and phenotype. And the way she views genotype-phenotype maps are as an abstraction of developmental processes that associates phenotypes to genotypes, accounting for the way phenotypes change over genotypic changes, and thus for developmental biases. These maps are modeling tools that abstract away from the specificities of the developmental mechanisms actually connecting genes and phenotypes, and thus allow for explanations with a different scope than lineage explanations. So this whole section basically summarizes the sort of formal tool that you can use to look at causality from these statistical distributions of allele frequencies. So if you have a genotype where you have a bunch of allele frequencies and they're constantly changing due to selection or drift, that doesn't tell you a lot about the phenotype in and of itself. But you can have this genotype to phenotype map where you say, okay, there's this relationship between the state of these alleles and what's happening in the phenotype. And this process, when a change in some set of allele frequencies will result in a change in the phenotype or the way the phenotype is presented. And so this is something that is, a tool we can use to sort of go from that purely statistical interpretation of population dynamics and move towards a more causalist view of populational dynamics. What's also interesting here is that she starts to get into, thinking about the emergence of variance. So these explanations also account for the emergence of variance, but they do so by studying the biases development imposes on the production of phenotypes in populations. And so what tends to happen in genotype to phenotype maps is you get these variational tendencies. So the idea is that one can use these genotype to phenotype maps to study how likely a certain phenotypic change will be given the developmental structure of the trait and the mutational environmental inputs it may receive. And so developmental systems differ in the way they can generate phenotypic variation under such inputs, and their tendencies can be associated with general properties of the genotype to phenotype maps representing them. Some systems tend to retain their phenotype under mutational perturbations, represented in a mutationally robust genotype to phenotype map that maps many genotypic variants to the same phenotypic outcome. So you have this phenotypic buffering that you see in development where multiple genotypes can represent the same phenotype. Contrarily, other maps are very variable, associating different phenotypic variants to genotypic changes. So you have these, clear relationships between the frequency of alleles and changes in the phenotype. There's no buffering. It's just maybe like a purely statistical mapping to the phenotype. The idea, though, here is that there's a lot of variation in that. So you get these variational paths from genotype to phenotype, and that's kind of what she's getting at here, is that you can build these variational structures as from a consequence of having these genotype to phenotype maps, and furthermore as a consequence of viewing developmental biology as being both proximate and ultimate in terms of its causation. So that is all for that paper, I think. Yeah, a little tough maybe to get through, but I think maybe there's some lessons learned there. Okay, so I don't know, did Morgan have anything you wanted to add or say?
It's been a long time since I've looked at EES material. I definitely, this this What is Intelligence book that has a lot of interesting. I mean, again, it's a life, but it's very population genetics.
Yeah.
as well. It's a very population genetics view of artificial life.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think a very reasonable title for their paper is computational life, right?
Right.
Like that's the so certainly familiar with some of that debate. I really like I want to see models.
Yeah, hell yeah.
It's like, okay, these, I want to see models. I fear causes.
Yeah.
Or I yeah. It's been so long, I can't even remember what an ultimate cause is. Do we ever deal with ultimate causes?
Well, I guess the idea of ultimate cause is like if you see something that happens over, and it's relative to the proximate cause, right? So if you have something that happens in a lifetime and something that happens over like 1,000 generations, the ultimate cause is what happens after 1,000 generations. Whereas the proximate cause might be happening in a single generation or in a single period of evolution. Like you might have some burst of diversity that occurs in nature, like like the dinosaurs, and then over a long period of time, they're sort of inconsequential to the tree of life. It's kind of like an offshoot of the tree of life. So, like that's there are two different things there.
Sure. It's one of those things where it's just like, or you can always posit a more ultimate cause.
Yeah.
So but that's my main. I mean, one of the bits that I like about this book, or which again is kind of a summary of either his research or others, is the simulated basis, for the discussion, and as well as like or it's certainly another thing that I was trying to get across in the first reading group about it was like, if you only think of to some degree, we don't think about the diversity of genomes enough as well, right?
Yeah.
And you know, in the same way that it's interesting to go, what's the what was the Paul Sisek book that, or like, remember the reading group they did a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
And what was the book they were reading that, like, anyway, it was like cross species,
nice charts,
evolutionary, right? And we should be thinking about the genomic version of that.
Right.
And it should include plants.
Right.
Single-celled organisms and plants, right?
Right.
Because even though we're just thinking about, anatomical form, what EES is getting at is much more kind of fundamental, right? And again, it's like trying to get at all the mechanisms that are at play there, and just like how much duplication and other things, where it's just like, I'd still really love to come back. I think I might need to ask you for a paper on cognitive virology.
Okay.
Getting at again, like, we've got all this genomic material that's viral and yet like super, it's viral, but it's anatomical manifestation, or its phenotype, or like super specific, like either functions or like structures,
Yeah.
and that wasn't like, anyway, it's just very remarkable and very hard to map with language,
right?
And it's just like, I just want to see more of his computation.
Yeah.
Because he's got this. I haven't seen how. I mean, I'm sure. I'm trying to think. What's the big EES tome? I mean, there's a couple people that are widely cited when you kind of want to add a reference.
Right. Well, I think they've had book collections, and then there are other books.
And they definitely had like books that have like a chapter from everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
But like, where does symbiosis come in, or how is that particularly discussed? And again, in the so I me, I want to see more of the gecko papers.
Yeah.
Like, or I don't even know if gecko is the other, is gecko might be too too computational and not enough. Not enough A-life.
Yeah, too applied. Yeah, gecko's usually for developing genetic algorithms.
It's whereas A-life is still like, it isn't focused on evolutionary theory enough.
Right.
You know what I mean? Anyway, but like really interesting, and I'm on two minds with Dennis Noble right now, but he was just he just spoke on Michael Evans' channel, or which is part of the I forget what he's calling his platonic space.
The Platonic Symposium thing or whatever.
Yeah, but it's like Platonic spaces or something. Like it is. It's like Platonic something symposium. I think. Anyway, he had noble speaking. Just I think Professor Dave Explains does a pretty good tear down of a lot of noble stuff. But it's just like like with noble, it's just like he brings out some good criticisms, but doesn't necessarily. Okay,
there it is.
Okay, yeah. He doesn't do enough computation.
Yeah, that's always the problem with like philosophy and getting into some of these debates is I know there's like computational philosophy, but it's not. And then the people who do a lot of the computation don't think about the philosophical issues, and it's really kind of hard to bridge the two and get it published somewhere where people can see it. So.
Yeah. I've definitely been warming to this "What Is Intelligence" book. Yeah, and he's one of the speakers too, right?
Yeah.
He's
might be a more recent one, but
I certainly just saw the book. Yeah, where's that?
That one?
Yeah. What's it called? Computational. Okay, yeah. Computational genesis. Yeah.
How long is this book? It looks really thick.
It is. But it's not. But it's small pages.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
And so yeah. I don't have its actual stats, but the other thing being that like a lot of it is really it's some summarization of research, which I would say we've probably covered some of that stuff in more depth. Especially when he's going through this kind of genetic phenotype, and yeah, but it's got a big still I got to finish it before the 18th.
Oh, it's a library book.
It's well, we're doing the second part.
Oh, okay.
But just getting into the kind of consciousness as a reflective self-prediction.
Is the 18th when the next event is? Or
yeah.
For 11's thing or the other one?
No. Ours. Our reading group. Yeah. I mean, it's like in person. Oh, well, it's hybrid. It's hybrid. But we will be. It's Tom graciously moved the in-person meeting to the tower.
Nice.
So that's it will be fun to host.
Yeah.
And trying to think if there was anything else.
I feel like there's something there for like an eventual computational philosophy club, semi-ecolopto big group. Like I'd like to see I'd like to see everybody, like even like a Frontier Tower, and then that crew, and then us here, kind of as like a big something. Like that's a little bit because I'm in the mode of trying to organize such things and like doing reading groups, but then also like we talk about the more like synthetic time or the whatnot. I think that would be fun. I'm open to it. I don't have anything to suggest, but like this just sticks out to me as potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to get a better sense of Barinholtz's work. I've just never done.
I think he's putting out more stuff slowly, like recently, and I haven't gotten to like watch it or look at it. But yeah, like the same thing about like computation.
It's one of these things where it's just like I need to see some papers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you know, again, computational philosophy. I'm going to lean on that word computational.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think between that and I know Addie, who's has a lot of plans to do things in a biologically grounded and like pushing certain parts of biology in a particular direction relative to his interests. Barinholtz is with the LLM stuff and language, and I think Addie is trying to also. I think he's really trying, especially in the next few months in the year ahead. I think he's trying to go into a sense of like, let's talk about biology. So a lot of the things that came up here about like some of the a Paul Kaisek like paper on bliss and heard of that. I don't know if he's quite that deep into it yet, but I could see that being like a good thing that may have some energy around that soon.
I gotta say, is Google Scholar is not what I would have imagined.
Whose?
Ellen Barinholtz.
Oh, like what is his Google Scholar?
I mean, I'm seeing like visual fixations during processing of time-compressed audio-visual presentations. Mice recognize 3D objects from recalled 2D pictures. Let's see. The role of bio-inspired modularity in general learning. That's kind of interesting. A controlled investigation of behaviorally cloned deep neural network behaviors in an autonomous steering task. A lot of visual cognition.
Yeah.
I mean, do you mean that relative to like the LLM focus, or like?
Yeah.
It's been interesting
with the LLM, being very focused on the kind of recursiveness.
It's been interesting to kind of see that because it's sort of like it's almost like an inversion, or because I don't really like using this phrase, but it just came into my mind so much from other things recently, like an Uno reverse card in terms of like Gary Marcus and LLMs are no good, and now I think he's really trying to use the LLM structure to more so get at language, and it's been interesting to tease apart what his take on. I get sort of philosophically some of the language, like okay, let's just look at language. An interesting way to think about his work is like language. Whose problem is the mind-body problem? And it's like, oh, it's language's problem, in the sense of language is sort of doing its own thing, and the rules of language are not necessarily the same as like biology or whatnot. And I kind of get that, and I want to see more where he's going with that. But yeah, it's sort of like where are you kind of drawing the lines about like embodiment and cognition and everything else? And like I don't know some of those. I don't know where his like. I get a sense of the direction he's trying to go in still, but I don't know like where he's drawing the lines with some stuff. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. I mean, that's just what's needed to be able to have a good discussion with him about it.
Right. Yeah.
Hopefully these things exist. But then there are also texts like these, Blazes, which are a very large synopsis of a lot of work, which gives us a lot of material to discuss. I mean, like we could be going much slower through this book, and still have very fruitful conversations.
Yeah.
And is the reading group, is that what the reading group is about right now, or has been?
It is.
Okay.
It's, you know, like historically, we've done a book and a paper, but this one, you know, it is such an overview of such a large amount of material.
Yeah.
Plus, I think there really are some great.
If it is hybrid, when is that one?
So December 18th. It would be 10 o'clock your time.
That's fine.
Okay. But very happy to add you. I mean, you know, like.
Yeah. Please do. Even if I can't make the whole thing, I will try to do it. I feel like I've just stepped into, and I'll if we have time, I'll say a few things soon about my end of stuff. I feel like it's an era of like, oh, like I'm finally functioning, and then the year's ending and a lot of stuff, but then also like these reading groups and these other smaller like things in between full events and nothing are popping up more that I can do, and then I'm kind of coming out of that and doing that, even though some things are ending this year. So I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to. If we want to say about that, we can. But I know this. Did you want to think Bradley, or how much did you want to split up the time that we have left?
Well, I think probably we can finish up with an update from Jesse. If you'd like to talk about what you've been up to, and
yeah. Okay, so I will do that, and I know we only have like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so at most.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where to begin. Because I can show some things, and I don't have like a good visual for other things. Basically, I'll start with some general JoPro stuff.
Okay.
The newest thing is basically this, which is a reading group, and I hope to cover some papers, and also maybe a little bit of what I'd like to do and sort of do here. Part of how this came about is Avery's sort of venturing out into the realm of doing things a bit more, and which is I'm very happy for, and I wanted to support that. But also, there's this overlap with things. Avery's interests are kind of in some game development, some simulation, a lot of the personal narrativity and that stuff, and plot twists type things. That's one thing. In Plot Twisters proper, we've been having some regular meetings and building up some steam, and very much a nod to the classic Bradley line of momentum versus progress, or progress can be more, sometimes momentum and maintaining it is just vital, even though progress may look like this or that along the way. And we've maintained momentum through the summer, and some really interesting things that come out from that. And the sort of the unified piece here, which I'll very briefly mention, is this paper, which is out of MIT, out of the Fluid Interfaces Lab at MIT Media Lab. And this paper has sort of come up in three-ish different spaces now. But I'll get back to that in a moment. This group, and I kind of want to put ethics in here or something after our first. We had a very brief preliminary meeting. It wasn't brief, but it was me, Avery, and another person named Molly, who kind of went over our ideas about what we want to cover in this group. This isn't really a great outline because it's not updated, but we basically wanted to talk about some papers, our background motivation. We talked about the RAF paper, which I'll talk about soon, and some different interests, and we'll kind of cover papers in this space. Avery's maybe a bit more interest in game development and like implementing some things. Molly is a bit more, I don't want to say ethics focused, but like what is it? What do these technologies mean, even for like studying elements of like cognition, I don't want to say cognition and consciousness, but how these technologies relate to our internal structure and functioning. So kind of almost a deeper phenomenological plus human computer interface. And she has a background in like some human computer interface things and how machines and trust relate and stuff like that. So this is happening. Like this is kind of getting off the ground, and I inherently see it as sort of a part of like, you know, society ethics technology group, and then I wanted to open it up here and kind of, you know, now that we kind of have a little bit more sense about what's going on, just, you know, I want it to be an open thing that if we want to merge it with anything in orthogonal lab or say, hey, you know, I would like to invite other people to that if they want to do that as sort of a natural, it's basically society ethics technology reading group with a little bit of game dev and a little bit of ethics. Focus on these like the digital the experience of certain digital things. Like it can tie into VR stuff as well. It's not specific to a particular hardware instantiation of it, but all of those things are covered. So I kind of see it as a natural JoPro orthogonal lab, and I even kind of because some of the stuff has come up already in plot twisters. I would ideally like it to be sort of a JoPro orthogonal lab plot twisters combined reading group session thing, particularly led by Avery and myself. And honestly, if I can center Molly too, I feel like Molly's this like actually great counterweight to things that we and some of the philosophy and some of the phenomenology are interested in too. So I kind of would like to have that be sort of the main, if you will, co-hosts of the discussion, and go from there. But we'll see. I'm not entirely. We're just getting it started, but I wanted to do it more ahead, and particularly for orthogonal too. Like I'm going to mention like, hey, like Avery is just getting, you know, kind of coming out of a period of not doing a lot, but they are interested in some of the they're experimenting with some of their own game development stuff and their own theories and implementing into the spaces. So I'm like, hey, like we have some experience with some of the simulation work here, so like let's try to overlap that as much as possible. So that's one thing that's happening. I'll go into some of the specifics here about this. It sort of came about. You know, Avery said, this is some quote that I captured. I'm passionate about ways that digital narratives can be used to enable flourishing, a la, reminds me of the Advancing Humans with AI, Pat Patton and Patty Mays at MIT phrase flourishing, but I don't think they knew that at the time. As part of this, I'm interested in exploring both the sociocultural considerations behind technology we've crafted, as well as the creation of insight models of aging and the effective implementation towards technology to that end. Like, okay, nice. Also, like, I don't know if Jen will be a part of the meetings proper all the time, but I've kind of made it a social work kind of spotlight because Jen's a social work student, and I wanted to bring her into this because one of the things that's coming up all the time, and this could be a conversation for a different time, but it's like in the training of someone learning to be a clinical social worker or whatever, it's a very interesting use case of someone who is thrust upon both people dealing with these AI relationships and in the training of someone in the graduate program. It's an interesting situation where as a master student, you're kind of prohibited from using AI to make your stuff. But there's also an instance of grading through AI is you're told the TAs are using AI to grade your papers and give you feedback, and you in a mandatory course, which you cannot get out of, and you cannot opt out of the pilot program, you are exposed to a pilot program for a GTP-like agent that's used for your training as a developing professional, with a particular early stages model of GTP-based agents that you're supposed to interact with and learn from how to do your vocation on other people, on other human beings. So it's sort of like you're on the business end of the AI, but you're not given any knowledge about it. And that's something that we talked about that today, and it's an ongoing conversation. But I feel like it's a fun mix here because we have Avery, who's very interested in this, theory and art and game development and meaning, and Molly, who has this background in like doing technology and being part of like government implementations and different people dealing with the impact of technology. Then you have Jen, who's doing like the social work, both like, and is a current master's student who's learning to deal with people that are having to deal with technology and using herself. Like, this is a really interesting mix in that space. And I kind of wanted to keep different elements of that in the group over time. And obviously you all know my interests and my eccentricities. So just a few things to mention out of this. The first thing we're going to cover is oh, I just messed it up here. This paper. And it's also a slight note. Ironically, before I get into this paper, this came up. One person from Plotwish is at the Oxford Internet Institute still, and this is a separate reading group. This is the Games and Technologies Interest Group, which has kind of been on hiatus for a little bit. They're like totally unrelated to me making this other group. Like, oh, hey, by the way, I might be starting this up again in the next year. So in the next few months, this might come out, which is very much even more exploring games industry, XR, VR, all those things. And we might have sort of an invite to attend some of that. A lot of cool people. Amanda Curtis is Plotwers and many other cool people here. But that may be sort of another related thing that hopefully we interact with somewhat, maybe cross-pollinate with a little bit. I mentioned this very briefly. I'll mention this is actually a really interesting discussion between Brene Brown, who's kind of almost pop psych, but not really. Like, she actually I've kind of been not followed her at all for a while, and this is actually a really interesting discussion between Brene Brown and Kate Crawford, who like Atlas of AI and all this other stuff. Also, like her amazing website. It's not the right thing. Calculating Empires. For map lovers, this is just a cool thing, like across eras, timeline, and these sort of like different communications and education and stuff. Very like frontier map, like all the cool stuff. It's a nice effort. It's imperfect, but it's a nice collection for the last 500 years or so. So shout out to Kate Crawford for that. But this discussion was actually quite interesting and quite relevant, and more about that some other time. This paper came up a little bit in the discussion group and with Jen about like divorces and this sort of like these advanced things about like AI relationships, both chatbots and all that other stuff, and how they're affecting real people and these pressures on all this stuff. More about this some of the time. But the center point for right now, and what I'll conclude on is this paper, which is, I think it might be easy to do this too, just for some, like, where does this paper come from? This paper comes from, it's not showing up here. Well, yeah, you guys probably know enough anyway, but I I showed this paper to someone, like, oh yeah, this is really nice. Like, it's a nice paper because it has some grounding and different stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, Rosalind Picard is sort of, the captain of effective computing in that way, and Patty Mays has been a long-time person at Fluid Interfaces at MIT Media Lab. And Minsol Kim is doing a lot of really cool stuff. Minsol also had a paper at NeuroIPS about interpreting EEG data in a certain way, which is pretty cool. But this paper is very much this. What's cool about it? I'm just going to jump into it. Reflective agency for empirical framework for AI-mediated self-reflection systems. And I'm not going to go through. Jump in and just get to some of the parts where it's in here or related stuff. And they do try to ground it in philosophy in a nice way. Mediated selfhood, phenomenology. They situate phenomenology here with Heidegger's stuff and Indies, I think. Edith. And they go this, they get a little bit of, Aristotle, virtue, ethics, eudaimonia stuff. They get these principles of sort of what's going on. And they try to develop this framework that's around the principles and then also these tensions. They try to mitigate these tensions about, or not, to try to address or identify these tensions about between user autonomy and systemic guidance, and try to put that out, what is someone's experience doing and how it impacts on things like phenomenology and overall the sense of how someone's narrative is being developed. The kind of the rough 1 or 2 sentence version of the paper is, and they do a number of these case studies on common 2-part empirical case study. First, systemic analysis of 6 widely used AI journaling applications, and then an exploration of perception responses to these tensions and principles. So they're using things like Replica, I think Waze, and some other popular things that are these AI journals or mediators, or this advanced, basically these chatbots that are purposed for different programs, and they're looking at how does this affect how someone's drawing a conclusion or how someone is reflecting, and they look at the different pressures on all this, on the journaling process, and the why this paper is sort of interesting, and I originally presented it to some folks in Plotwizards, is that in essence, this paper, I think, justifies everything Plotwizards has been doing from the start, which is to say most AI right now pushes people towards towards conclusions, or as Brene Brown said very nicely in this talk, the seduction of it is a certainty. It's a certainty-making machine. You're going to get certainty, even if it's hogwash, even if it's a hallucination or halluci-citation, making up references to justify itself. You're presented with this veneer, this appearance of certainty, in its language in general. And we're saying even in the journaling component, or this supposedly interactive component where you're finding something supposed to relate to you or whatever, the pressure is on this sort of arbitrary reduction of nuance or reduction of all these other things, and putting it into, well, here's something that's going to kind of undermine the agency of your reflection process, of your self-narrative, of your comprehension of the situation. And it's kind of a call for, we envision AI not as a guide, but as a quiet companion helping individuals stay connected to their evolving sense of self and remain the primary agents in their self-discovery, thereby preserving what we define as the reflective agency. We urge designers and researchers to adopt and extend our framework to ensure future technologies genuinely support autonomy, meaningful self-discovery, and a digital well-being, which is that's basically what Plotwizards has been founded on. So it's a sort of interesting paper for Plotwizards that justifies, with some research and some analysis, what Plotwizards is doing there. And that's cool for Plotwizards, but it's also interesting in the diginest sense for game design, and in some of our other senses for, teasing apart some of their take on phenomenology, some of their take on this human-computer interaction part of things, and so on. So I will pause there for any questions. we're going to go over the paper. I think is be our first major paper in the Indigenous reading group, although it's kind of already come up in some other places before, but we might kind of center some discussion about that for the group next week. We actually met Friday night, which probably isn't a popular time for most people, but Avery and Molly and myself were like, okay, well, this is an okay time to do it. So we might meet at Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time again next week, which probably most people won't go, but we are making them async, recording them, and eventually get them out. But that's sort of where we're going to go with that, and a lot of other things ahead. So I'll pause for any comments or questions for now.
All right. Yeah, I'm. It looks pretty good. I'm glad to see that you're doing a reading group and kind of get it. This is how you tease out ideas and kind of work through them. Is do these collective groups and kind of figure out.
I'm very much interested in, like, in some ways, on a personal level, this reading group is I don't want to say harbinger, maybe not foreshadow, but I do want to get. I've kind of been warming up myself on a personal note. I've been completely between October and like most of November. I've just not been able to be like present for a lot of things, and I want to have like we've had many things about within oral we've had discussions of like let's have a discussion around project management stuff or a specific series about that. I'm like 100% more now ready to do that on many fronts. So this is one thing in a very nice niche space. But for things like, I think I'm going to do one on philosophy of history or sort of things that are around sort of the map and space making and contextualization, but then also a more pragmatic one in terms of project management and many things we talked about here. So I would like to talk, not right now, but maybe in Slack or whatever, about what things we like to center in the next, if we're going to be making perhaps a reading group, but also kind of like even like structured lectures or just like structured discussions about things that aren't just kind of, hey, what's this paper say, but more like we're going to investigate, project management, digital project management or something, or we're investigating. Like I found the Peter Godwin-Smith book about like theory versus reality, like a book I talked about like last year or something in terms of philosophy, history of science type stuff. Like being a little bit more structured, because what I'll conclude with, and a bit of a soapbox comment from before, but I'll make it very quick here, is I'm pretty discontent with a lot of education and educational materials about things that I care about. And I'm kind of on the warpath of like, I'm just going to start building about it and doing it and talking about it myself because a lot of things don't cover the context that I want, and I want to see them in the world. So that's sort of a teaser to where I'm going in the year ahead with things. So anything about those topics that we might want to make discussions, structured discussions, some education discussions, lecture series around, think of me and let's talk about that.
Okay.
The end. I'm done with that.
Well, that sounds great. Yeah. Yeah, we should think about the next year. I'm going to do a overview of the lab's progress for this year. I'm going to put it up on the YouTube channel, and then we'll maybe have maybe we should have an admin meeting at some point soon, like maybe after the first of the year.
Do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever you start, whenever stories come up, I always think of the computational story lab, but I know that's not exactly what their focus is. It's super interesting, and if they do get started, if they do restart that group in Oxford, let me know, because
this one?
Connect them to some people. Yeah. I think that would be interesting to connect to some of the new Oxford Neurotech Society people too, because they're also very interested if they're covering VR, XR kind of stuff too.
I've heard about them, and then I know Amanda Curtis is a Plot Twisters co-founder, so
Okay.
like she's in house for that group, and she's like the main person behind the Small Hassles Court, those playtesting things I might have mentioned a few weeks ago. So she's doing stuff there, and I don't know a lot of details yet about it, but I have a sense that she's definitely someone who can get things done. So as it starts up through her stuff, I'll definitely mention it here. I think it's a fun. It's such an interesting wave of stuff as Plot Twisters is kind of, I don't know, ascending from a certain slumber, and then there's this adjacent stuff too with some of the game dev stuff. I'm really curious what's going to happen there.
Yeah. And then the other thing I thought of for had a woman from MIT Media Lab visit from the it's definitely cybernetic. It's like cybernetic psychology group.
Cyborg psychology from Pat.
Maybe
that's the newest one. If it's really new, it's that.
I think so. And so she just had a paper on she's a co-author on a paper on like it relates to chatbots, but it's like chatbots for like sexual partners, or like
could be critical matter too.
Human AI interactions with this kind of romantic relationships, and somebody, Constance, and this comes up a lot, right? Which sort of relates to the more broadly defined computational psychiatry, but where it's just like are LLMs able to do? Guillaume Dumas just covered this in a kind of pop or kind of like a news interview, because like people keep proposing in Frontier Tower, like LLMs can solve the loneliness crisis, and it's just like,
you guys, man, I'm not a fan of like the debate stuff, but like I don't want it to be a debate. I want it to be a steel man in the problem space thing that I'm working on for like JoPro. Like I'm tired of the bullshit debate stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean like get those people need to be in a room with the social workers who are dealing with people with those problems. Like if come on guys, like you can't you're all playing you're all full of there's so much of this like you've got to move past this like we will. It's like you sit in a room, talk to people that are dealing with the exhaust from the system that they have to deal with for their jobs and they're trained in. Yeah. Otherwise, but no, and that's not. Obviously, you're not going to be that hard in the paint when you're talking to people in Frontier Tower about that because we want them. You know what I mean?
People are throwing out things. I mean, it's always difficult when somebody's just dropping something and in chat where they're like, wouldn't these just be great to solve the loneliness crisis? Like, how much is this person really invested in this particular thought, right?
Right, and it's
but to your point, something like, do you think that that's the equivalent of actually having a group support group? I mean, in the sense of there's 1,000 things that come from actually having people in a room together that is not even attempted to be replicated by an LLM.
And I think it's so important to like. It's not. I'm not even out. I'm critical of things, but I also feel like it's not. I don't think it's the problem that there's the technology. It's like we need to just take it beyond the initial. So much of this, the new AI stuff is, I think I find it to be surprisingly not surprising, but like there's so much of it is just like I've been saying. Can I easily pull it up here? I don't know. My thing about silver bullets in the dark, like everybody's just very, very, very excited about like a solution to one-off thing. It's like, no, guys, we got to get to a different level of like engaging the problem, where it's like, sure, LLMs can do this and look at the whole problem space and like move it in that direction, as opposed to, oh, I have an idea, I can vibe code it up and get something out there. Like I think that's the shift that I'm interested in, particular, as you guys know. And again, it's not. No. Yeah,
it's you know, I mean, and you know me, I love to find the complexity in things, and you know, so I think there's some interesting things just around, you know, LLMs that cyborg psychology group is looking at, LLMs as relates to, you know, what I would call real computational psychiatry, where, you know, like how if you try to weaponize LLMs for interacting with sick people, you know, how well can they respond and adapt and control themselves? They're all interesting problems. Definitely don't suggest using them. But there's a I'll drop a link in computational psychiatry about this.
Yes.
But then just wanted to end with the paper. Nicole Rust came to speak at Stanford this week, and I gotta say, it was both. I mean, it was great, and it was also just like, oh, okay, yeah, like her, you know, the synopsis of her elusive cures are a lot of things that you've heard me cover in terms of just the issues in psychiatry, but such a great overview, and I'm still waiting to see what comes from her embedding with Yal Niv. You know, in terms of like what will come from her time in a you know, computational psychiatry group like Yal's. I think will be interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, still, yeah. So I don't know if I don't know if I can get our reading group to do elusive cures as a reading group.
Is that her latest book, or is that?
That's her latest book.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. And it gets at all the kind of, you know, she covers all the, you know, the what's been going on, you know. So she's like taking kind of like the best bits of kind of the history of psychiatry together with, you know, like what happened with Tom Insel joining Google, and, you know, the kind of are we going to be able to tech our way out of this? And yeah. So, and I think there's also, I can try and find. I believe they're going to do some videos. She's definitely doing a tour, but she, you know, it's not just like a typical. I mean, I'd be interesting to see the Brene Brown too, because I think sometimes she can be very, very well grounded in the literature, and as well as like really understanding, like you're saying, like the power of group therapy and being vulnerable and things like that.
I have a complete confession, and we can go. We have to wrap this up. And my confession is like I kind of was like Brene Browned out because I saw her stuff everywhere, and I'm like, is this become like live, laugh, love of psychology?
Yeah.
And I listened to her talk, and I was like, holy moly, like no, she's really getting at some hard stuff, and like even like I looked at a research page on her website about like grounded theory research and what she's trying to do, and it's like, okay, like I relate to that. Like you're trying to you're trying to get at things in a different way, and like I've just a little bit of, if you will, game recognizes game about like the struggle of what she's trying to do, and then her ability to make it very popular, like accessible to people, sports analogies,
which is important too, right? Like I mean, to some degree, it's like when a new Michael Levin video comes out, I kind of have to check ahead and be like, is there anything new?
Right.
But at the same time, if you're out there trying to move public opinion, right? Like you're gonna repeat yourself. I mean, like politicians know this better than anyone.
That's like a whole like I would love to have a discussion about not just science communication, but like modern day field building work, because that's like so key. So let's like I'm gonna note that and come back to that later.
Yeah. So definitely check out more Nicole Russ, because she's the one who's been pushing for more scientists to engage in science communication, both for public opinion reasons as well as like for better science. So definitely good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks for this robust discussion, and thanks for your updates, Jesse. And hopefully this meeting, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and so let's keep up the discussion, and maybe we'll come back to some of this next week. Our schedule for the rest of the
meeting next week.
the schedule for the rest of this year is we'll maybe do 2 more meetings, at least one. I plan to meet next week. Maybe we'll do one on the 20th as well. So, but and then we want to have an admin meeting maybe after the first of the year, so we can talk about what to do in the next year.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I have things that I'll send in Slack or emails to just like update other stuff. But sounds great. Okay. This is very nice, and thank you for hosting. Good to see you.
All right. Yeah. Good to see you too. Bye. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Bye. Bye.